Stop scrolling. Because what I'm about to show you is going to completely change the way you see the history of the world. In 1776, while the entire world had its eyes fixed on the birth of the United States, a completely different organization was being born in the shadows of Europe. No armies. No territories. No flags. But with a plan that, according to real historical documents that survive to this day, was ambitious enough to topple monarchies, silence churches, and redraw the map of global power. And the name of that organization? The Illuminati. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about crazy internet theories, videos of celebrities making triangle signs, dollar bills, and baseless conspiracies. And that's totally fair. But this is different. Because what you're going to see in this video is not theory. It's history. Documented. Recorded. With dates, names, and files that the Bavarian government tried to destroy in 1785 and that survived anyway. Stay until the end because there's a twist in this story that almost nobody tells. And it's going to leave you with a question that won't leave your head for a long time. But before we get there, you need to understand the world the Illuminati were born into. Because if you don't understand the context, you won't understand the size of what they were trying to do. Europe in the 18th century was a silent battlefield. On one side stood absolute kings, powerful monarchies, and the gigantic influence of the Catholic Church. On the other, a growing intellectual movement called the Enlightenment, which defended ideas that were dangerous for the time: individual freedom, separation of church and state, rationalism, and direct questioning of religious power. These thinkers had no armies. But they had something even more dangerous. They had ideas. And the right ideas, spread to the right people, can bring down empires. Every ruler of the time knew that very well. It was in this scenario that Bavaria, a deeply Catholic region in the heart of Europe, became the epicenter of a conflict that nobody saw coming. And it was there, inside a university controlled by the church, that a professor named Adam Weishaupt began assembling something the world had never seen. Pay close attention here because this detail changes everything. Weishaupt was born in 1748, was educated in Jesuit schools and became the first layman to occupy the chair of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in 1773. But his growing rationalist influence over students and his collisions with loyal members of the church created an atmosphere of constant tension. Think about the irony of that. The man trained by the most disciplined and hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church would use that exact structure to create the most famous secret organization in history. On May 1, 1776, Weishaupt founded a secret society. Its members initially called themselves perfectibilists, but the world would come to know them as the Bavarian Illuminati. Prominent writers, thinkers, and members of the nobility from across Europe became members. Their elaborate rules and the use of ciphers in communication added mystery to their activities. Now stop for a second. Because this is more important than it seems. Weishaupt didn't create the Illuminati to be a villain. He created it because he was frustrated. His goal was to combat superstition, obscurantism, excessive religious influence over public life, absolutism, and abuses of state power. It was essentially a political society that aimed for a more democratic life, guided by Enlightenment ideals, reason and individual freedom. But here's where the problem starts. And this is where the story gets far more interesting than you'd imagine. Because one thing is having good intentions. A completely different thing is operating in the shadows inside a society that saw secret organizations as pure heresy. And yet another different thing entirely is growing too fast, recruiting people who are too powerful and starting to attract way too much attention. The organization was built as a mirror of the very structure it promised to fight. The hierarchy Weishaupt created was not invention, it was imitation. Modeled on the same Jesuit principles learned in the Vatican's classrooms. Do you understand what that means? The man who wanted to destroy the church's control created an organization with the same structure as the church. Levels of initiation. Secrets guarded by degrees. Members who didn't know what the members above them knew. And it worked. For a few years, it worked very well. But before I tell you what happened when everything started to fall apart, you need to know who joined this organization. Because the names are going to surprise you. Subscribe to the channel right now, because what comes next is the part nobody tells you in history books. The first members of the Illuminati were not madmen. They were not outcasts. They were not people living in the shadows of European alleyways. They were exactly the opposite. The order was divided into internal classes, novices, minervals, and lesser Illuminati at the base. Above them, the Freemasons. And at the top, a mystery class composed of the degrees of priest, regent, magus, and king. Nobody who joined knew what existed at the level above them. You only found out when you were promoted. And when you found out, there was still another level above that you didn't know about. It was an onion of secrets. Layer upon layer upon layer. And it was using this structure that Weishaupt began doing something no secret organization had ever attempted before with such method, infiltrating the Masonic lodges of Europe. Think about the scale of that. Freemasonry was already, in that period, a network of connections among European elites. Nobles, military officers, intellectuals, government officials. All inside the lodges. And the Illuminati simply joined them. Silently. Without making noise. Recruiting members inside the lodges without most of them knowing they were being recruited into something different. Weishaupt and one of his early recruits, Adolf, Baron Nig, introduced the Masonic elements that came to characterize the order. And although the Bavarian Illuminati became something of a trend among academics and minor nobles, the organization grew rapidly in size and influence. At the peak of the organization, historians estimate the Illuminati had between 2,000 and 3,000 active members spread across Europe. 2,000 to 3,000 people in strategic positions. In universities. In royal courts. In government apparatus. All connected by a system of codes, secret names, and encrypted communications that made the organization almost impossible to track from the outside. Almost. Because in 1784, something happened that nobody in the Illuminati expected. Something small. Absurd. The kind of coincidence that changes the course of history. A horseback messenger, carrying internal documents of the order destined for contacts in Paris, was struck by lightning during a storm near the city of Ratisbon. The rider passed away on the spot. The documents found on the body were handed over to the Bavarian government authorities. Upon examining them, authorities discovered they were the internal protocols of the Illuminati order, including detailed strategies for political expansion and influence. Stop. Do you understand what just happened? A bolt of lightning. A single bolt of lightning. Brought down the biggest secret in 18th century Europe. And what was written in those documents was enough to send the Bavarian government into a state of total panic. Stay here, don't close this video. Because what happened in the next 12 months will show you how governments react when they discover they've been infiltrated from within. And the response is far more brutal than you'd imagine. In 1785, the Bavarian government banned the Illuminati and ordered the arrest of its members. Houses were raided. Files were seized. Members fled to other countries. Weishaupt was forced into exile. Cells were dismantled. Rituals were exposed. Officially, the story ended there. Authorities announced the order had been dismantled, its leaders disgraced. But this is where the official history and the real history begin to diverge in a very uncomfortable way. Copies of the conspiratorial documents were sent by the Bavarian government to every head of church and state in Europe. Every single one. Kings. Popes. Cardinals. All were warned. And here comes the part that history books rarely mention. Most of them ignored the warning. Some of those warned claimed the documents were fake. Others called it a joke. And when the French Revolution exploded just 4 years later, in 1789, the same people who had ignored the warning began wondering if they had made the biggest political mistake of their lives. Because what happened in France between 1789 and 1799 was exactly the kind of collapse the seized documents described as an objective: monarchy overthrown, church weakened, ancient power structures completely destroyed. In 1797, 8 years after the storming of the Bastille, two men independently published analyses of the French Revolution that placed responsibility directly on the Illuminati. Natural philosopher John Robison and ex-Jesuit Abbé Augustin Bérulle reached the same conclusions without knowing each other. Robison and Bérulle argued that the order's members had a complex global plan to subvert the church, the state, and society. By infiltrating Masonic lodges and other institutions, they had supposedly made their way deep into the French elite and, disguised as Jacobins, overthrown the monarchy. Now, before you tell me that's a conspiracy theory, let me tell you what serious historiography says about this. The idea of an Illuminati conspiracy spreading through periodicals and influencing the clergy was, according to historians, technically nonsense. But it quickly became popular nonsense among British conservatives. Both authors' books went through multiple printings within the same year. What does that mean? It means the narrative of the Illuminati as an invisible force controlling world events was not born on the internet. It was not born in Hollywood. It was born in 1797, published by serious men, read by serious intellectuals, taken seriously by serious governments. The most famous conspiracy theory in modern history is 230 years old. And the Vatican? What did the Church do through all of this? That is exactly what Part 3 is going to answer. And the answer involves files that remain closed to this day, a symbol you carry in your pocket every single day without knowing its real history, and a question no historian has been able to definitively answer. Comment right now: do you think the Illuminati really caused the French Revolution, or was it all just a convenient scapegoat for frightened conservatives? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. You made it to the part that most videos on this topic never reach. Because it's easy to tell the origin of the Illuminati. It's easy to talk about the ban. But what happened after the ban is where the story becomes truly impossible to ignore. Let's go back to 1785. The documents were seized. Weishaupt is in exile. The Bavarian government decreed the official end of the order. And the world breathed a sigh of relief. But secret orders do not vanish by decree. Destroying the name is not erasing the method. A society does not need to exist everywhere. It only needs to be believed everywhere. And this is where the chapter begins that the Vatican never wanted you to know about. The Catholic Church had very concrete reasons to fear the Illuminati. It wasn't religious paranoia. It was political calculation. Because Weishaupt's organization had as its declared objective exactly what the Church most protected: control over education, public morality, and influence over European governments. The Bavarian Illuminati had as their declared goal the overthrow of existing monarchical governments and the replacement of established religion with a cult of reason. Read that sentence again. The replacement of established religion with a cult of reason. For the Church of 1785, that wasn't philosophy. That was an act of war. And when the seized documents reached Rome, something happened inside the Vatican's archives that historians debate to this day. Copies of the conspiratorial documents were sent to every head of church and state in Europe. And according to records from the time, most chose to ignore them or classify them as forgeries. But ignoring something publicly doesn't mean ignoring it internally. And it's in that space between what was said publicly and what was done behind closed doors that the hardest questions of this story live. Why do so many archives from this period simply no longer exist? Why are the internal records of the Illuminati so fragmented, so incomplete, so full of inexplicable gaps? Nobody has a definitive answer. And that absence of an answer is, in itself, an answer. Now subscribe to the channel because what comes next connects all of this to the symbol you probably have in your pocket right now. Grab a $1 bill. Or open an image on Google. Look at the left side. You'll see an unfinished pyramid with an eye at the top radiating light. Below it, in Latin, Novus Ordo Seclorum. New Order of the Ages. And above the eye, Annuit Coeptis. He approves our undertakings. Now you understand why this symbol has fueled theories for decades. But here is where the real history is more interesting than any theory. The Great Seal of the United States was approved in 1782, and its designer Charles Thomson explicitly stated that the eye of Providence symbolized divine watchfulness and God's favor over American independence. The pyramid represented strength and permanence. The fact that it was unfinished meant the nation's work was still ongoing. But then why did this symbol end up on a dollar bill? The pyramid and the eye didn't appear on the dollar bill until 1935, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who happened to be a Freemason, added them to the banknote. Roosevelt was a Freemason. His vice president Henry Wallace was too. And it was a deliberate decision by both of them to place that side of the Great Seal on the most circulated currency in the world. There is no credible historical evidence linking the American founding fathers to the Bavarian Illuminati. The Eye of Providence predates both groups by centuries, appearing in Renaissance religious paintings as a representation of God's omniscience. But the fact that this symbol was consciously chosen by two Freemasons to be printed on the currency of a rising superpower in 1935, when the Illuminati were already part of the global conspiratorial imagination, that is, at the very least, a choice loaded with layers. The idea that the eye and pyramid are signs of Illuminati control gained traction in the late 20th century, especially through books like Behold a Pale Horse and popular media such as Dan Brown's The Lost Symbol. And here we arrive at the most important point of this entire video. The point that separates critical thinking from lazy thinking. Not toward easy skepticism, and not toward easy belief. Toward the right question. The Illuminati were a real secret society, founded in 1776 to advance the principles of the Enlightenment. That is fact. They existed. They grew. They infiltrated power structures. They were banned. And after the ban, their cells had already tunneled deep into Masonic lodges across Germany. Their statutes lived in whispered rituals. Their oaths in private chambers. What happened after that, nobody knows for certain. And it is exactly that uncertainty that has fueled 230 years of theories, books, films, music and debates that have no end. The greatest power the Illuminati ever exercised was not political. It was not economic. It was psychological. They permanently occupied a space in the collective imagination of humanity that no decree, no archive and no historian has been able to vacate. So let me ask you the question this entire video was built to reach. If an organization manages to be officially banned, have its documents destroyed, have its members hunted down, and still remain alive in the world's imagination for more than 2 centuries, is that the failure of a conspiracy, or the greatest success a conspiracy could ever achieve? Think about that. And comment your answer right now. Because in the comments section of this video there's a conversation happening that's worth far more than any theory you'll find anywhere else. Tell me what you think. I read everything. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was built to reach. So hit subscribe right now, turn on the bell and share this video with someone you know is going to lose their mind after watching it. Because the next video is going to go deep into another file the world tried to close forever. And I promise you will not want to miss it. The story never ended. It just changed its address.